Okay, here we go. So we are at the bottom of Daf Beis Amud Beis. The Gemara brought in two variations of how to understand Rabbi Eliezer. Our Mishnah said that Rabbi Eliezer said that Kinui needs two Eidim, Stira only needs one Eid. And Rabbi Yosy Yehuda's version said the opposite, that Rabbi Eliezer holds that Kinui doesn't need any Eidim or one Eid, and it's Stira that needs two Eidim. So the Gemara said, either way, it does create a little bit of a concern, because if Kinui doesn't need two Eidim, he can even be Mekaner her Beinoy Levenatzmoi, well then he could really trap her, because if she secludes herself with somebody, he can claim that he had prior to that been Mekaner her, and that will make her into a Sotah. That's if you hold like Rabbi Yosy Yehuda's version that Kinui doesn't need to aid him. But even if Kinui needs to aid him, but Stira doesn't need to aid him, well then you can also falsely claim that she was Soiser. So either way, there's a little bit of a factor of Ein Mudavar Soif. It's possible for a man to falsely drag his wife into a situation of Sotah. Then the Gemara wanted to understand, where does the word kinui come from? So we learned that it means it's davar hamatal kina. It's something that creates discord amongst people. So the Gemara tells us, if you hold that you don't need Eidim for kinui, meaning when he's mekana his wife, nobody has to know about it, well then what's going to happen is suddenly this woman is going to stop talking to people because of the fact that her husband prohibited her to. So she's going to unfriend people on Facebook. She's going to block people on Instagram. And then everybody's going to be insulted. What got into this lady? Suddenly she's snobbing us out. Because they won't know that her husband made kinui. And that's what's forcing her to cut off her relationships with these people. The Gemara says, if you hold that kinui needs to be done with two Eidim, well, then everybody will know why she suddenly unfriended them, blocked them, and stopped talking to them. So there, the kinui would be that there's going to be some discord between the husband and the wife, because you're a mechanomy, you don't trust me. So those are the two versions of how kinui would mean davar hamatal kina. Either it's matal kina between her and her friends, or it's matal kina between her and her husband. And that took us to the bottom of Daf Beis Amud Beis, and we're now ready to start Daf Gimel Amud Aleph. I'm just going to turn the Daf over. Beautiful. So the Gemara says, if kinui mean davar matal kina, clearly that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. So alma kasavri, it must be that the two versions that we just learned must hold the osir lekanis. Making kin is osir. It creates anger. It creates discord. Uman da'amar muter lekanis, ma loshen kinui. So how are you going to translate what kinui means if it's muter to do? It can't be something negative. Amar Nachman bar Yitzchak, ein kinui ela loshen asra. It actually means just a warning. It's not a matal kina, it's a warning. The Navi tells us that Hashem is mekana his land, meaning Hashem warned Klal Yisrael in advance of bringing perennials. In that case, it was talking about a swarm of locusts to eat up all the produce of the land. Before Hashem would do that, Hashem would warn Klal Yisrael. Tanya, we had a brisa. Hayi Rab Meir Omer, Adam over Aver B'Seiser. A person thinks they can be over an Aver B'Seiser, which Rashi tells us is referring to a woman who's acting inappropriately, but she thinks no one's going to find out about it. The next thing she knows, her face is plastered all over YouTube and Facebook. What does that mean? It means through the kinui, which is done in public, all of her indiscretions are suddenly public knowledge. Shenemar va'over alav ruach kina. So the ruach kina that prompts, that compels a husband to be mekana, comes with Ovar. The Ein Avera El Loshen Achraz. The word Ovar always means an announcement, a public announcement. Shenemar V'yitzav Moshe V'yaviru Koel B'machane. So you see the Loshen of V'yaviru of Ovar means something becoming public. Rish Lakish tells us something else. Ein Adam Over Avera Elam Kei Nichnas Boy Ruchstus. A person when he's sane and rational will never be over an Avera. But when a Ruchstus enters him and he has a bout of irrationality, that's when he does an Avera. Shenemar Ishish Ki Sista Ishtoi. As the Haggais Marav Ramshuk says, it doesn't say Kisita Ishtoi, she turns away. Rather, Sista Ishtoi, which has in it the root of the word Shaita. Tana Dever B'Shmuel, B'pnei Mahamina Torah, Eid Echad B'Saita. Why is it that if a woman had kinui and she had stira, and then only one aid came along and said that she was nitma, you believe that aid, and she does not go through the Sotah process, she becomes usher to her husband. Why does the Torah believe in Eid Echad? Zok Gemara, you know why? Sheraglayim Ladover. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence to support the fact that she was probably nitmas. Sharekinala, he warned her not to be found with this man. She totally ignored his warning, minister, and she secluded with him. It's pointing to the fact that she must have done an Avera. And therefore, we're going to go based on the testimony of that aid. I don't understand, Papa. If you look up the psukim that discuss the overall of Ruach Kina, the pasuk before this already discusses that there was already the pasuk before this. Here we're talking about the kinui, but the pasuk already before talks about the ishta kisista, the ish kisista ishta mol. In other words, it talks about the fact that she did the avera even before the kinui. How could you say it's reglaim over if after a kinu and after a stira there's an erechot shenitma, it's reglaim over? But the order of the psukim show that she was nitma. The pasuk talks about her being nitma even before the Torah introduces the kinu. So how could you say that the nitma is only believed within the erechot because of the buildup, the reglaim over of the kinu and the stira? It's after the Torah already talks about stira and tumah. Amar lei zok the Gemara. When it says va'avar, it means ukfar avar. So when the pasuk says va'avar of ruach kina, it means the woman was nistra nitma. However, let's rewind the clock a minute. Before this occurred, there was a kinui, and that's not the simplest reading of the pasuk, but that's what the Gemara is saying here. What the pasuk means. She was nitma, but prior to being nitma, there was a kinui made. In fact, Gemara, if that's how you're going to teach va'avar, that it doesn't mean something that's happening in the future. Rather, it's something that preceded a prior pasuk. Let's see how this concept fits in to the parsha of when Moshe Rabbeinu was dealing with Bnei Ruvain and Bnei Gad, and Chatzi Menashe, who wanted to remain be'evel hayarden. What did he tell them? He told them, all of your warriors have to go fight first in Eretz Yisrael, and after it's captured, then you'll be able to move back to Ever Yarden and take your land over there. So Hachanami, there as well, are you going to say when he told them, are you saying that Moshe Rabbeinu meant that they already did? Clearly, they hadn't fought a war yet. So there you can't say Va'avar is something that's preceding what we're talking about. So Gemara, there it's different. There, if you analyze the context of the psukim, it becomes very clear that this particular Va'avar is talking about something that's going to occur in the future. First, you're going to capture the land, and then you can go back the Evel Yarden. So it's quite clear from the context, mashma de lava. But the Va'avar by Sotah, if you look at its context, you'll see that it must mean that the Va'avar happened prior to the pasuk before. Alahacha by Sotah, if you want to say that the Va'avar happened after the Tumah, Va'avar Basar Tumah Stiru, then it doesn't make sense because Kinu Lamali. If in fact, chronologically, she was already Nista and she already became Tameh, what's the purpose of Kinui after all that? So from the context, it's obvious that the Kinui must have occurred before there was a Stira and before there was a Tumah. Beautiful. Tanu very b'shmal. In order to kanal ishtoi, elam kain nichnas no boy ruach. A person wouldn't do kinui unless some type of ruach came into him. Shenemar v'over alav ruach kina, the kina is ishtoi. The Torah said he got a ruach kina. What is this ruach kina? My ruach. Rabbanan ami ruach tumah. It's a ruach tumah. It's a bad thing that happened to him to cause him to suspect his wife and to start making accusations. Ravash Yom Ruach Tahira. No, it was a good thing that happened to him. He's concerned about his Kedusha, and he became this iron that he has to protect the Kedusha in his own. Umistaver command Ruach Tahira. It's more likely that the Ruach that's taken this man over, that prompted him to do the Kinui, was a good Ruach, a Ruach of Tahira. How do we know that? The Tanya, we learned a Machloikis Tanai. The Kinui is Ishtar. Is that Rishus? Does that mean the husband made Kinui and he's allowed to do it? Divrei Rabbi Shmuel? Or is it Rabbi Kiva Omer Chayva? The Kinui Ishtar means if you see that your wife is behaving inappropriately, there's a chiyuv to do the Kinui. If the ruach that compels this man to do Kinui is a good ruach, shaber, it makes sense to discuss if it's a mitzvah to make the kinui, if it's merely a reshus to make the kinui. Eli amrit ruach tuma. If you're going to say it's a bad thing that causes him to make the kinui, reshus v'chayva le'iyula le'inish ruach tuma b'nafshay. Can there be a discussion whether or not it's a mitzvah or it's a reshus for someone to have a ruach tuma in him? So clearly it must be a ruach tahira, and the question really is to what extent he makes that kinui. Is it mandatory or is it optional? So now we're going to delve down into this machloikas itself. Gufa. The kinui is ishtay rishus, divi Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva and Rechayva. Now not only do Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Kiva argue by kinui, there's two other places in the Torah where they have a machloikas whether something is optional or mandatory. Lo yitama. It says that a kohen is not allowed to be tam himself for a mace. However, for his sister that was never married, who never married, law to her, yitamo, he should become tamei. Once again, the same achloikus. Rishus de Rabbi Shmuel. It doesn't mean the kohen has to become tamei for his sister. It means he's allowed to become tamei. For Rabbi Kiva and Rechayv. Rabbi Kiva is a chiyuv on the kohen to be metam himself, to be Isaac in the burial of his sister. That's the second place where they argue. And the third place where they argue is whether or not you're mechuyev to keep an eved forever, an eved kanani, or if you're just allowed to keep an eved kanani forever. It says in the pasuk la'olam b'hem ta'avodu, forever you should work with the eved kanani. Rishus, that just means you're allowed to keep an eved kanani. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva Omer Chayva. You're mechuyev if you have an eved kanani not to free him. So it seems that every mitzvah we find, Rabbi Shmuel says, no, it's not a mitzvah, it's a rishus. So Lema Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Kiva b'chol ha'Torah kula hachi pligi. Let's say they argue by every mitzvah. Umar amar rishus, umar amar chayva. So he's asking, can you possibly say that the machlokes? We know there's 613 mitzvahs. We know there's mitzvahs say. So how could you say that this is Rabbi Shmuel Shita that every single mitzvah he waters down and he makes it into rishus. So there's no mitzvahs. No. As a default, every mitzvah is not a rishus, it's a chiyuv. But in each of these three cases, there was a special reason that the way Rabbi Shmuel analyzed the psukim, he came to the conclusion that dafka in these three cases, it doesn't mean a chiyuv, it just means rishus. The machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel is how to analyze the psukim in each of these three cases. So let's start with how they analyze the psukim by Sotah. It says in the pasuk, "V'kinei es ishtoi," rishus. It means one is allowed to make kinei. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Frag the Gemara, my time Rabbi Shmuel. Why would you say that from v'kinei es ishtoi it's only rishus? Why do I need the Torah to give me permission to make kinei? Zok the Gemara, because sober lo k'aytan the tan. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov Omer, klape shomer Torah loisisno as a chicha b'lvavecha. You're not allowed to have sinas china. Someone being mekana his wife is because he's has sin against her. So maybe kina should be aser. Yochel ki goin zeh, goin zu. You might think that kinoi, the act of making kinoi, is aser because of loisisno as a chicha b'lvavecha. Therefore, you need a pasuk by Sotah to say the kinoi just to tell us that you're allowed to do it. The kinoi is ishtoi. So, Frank the Gemara, what about Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva, Dr. Gemara, kinoi achrin aksiv. If you look at the pasuk, the word v'kinoi is ishtoi is mentioned twice. The first time, I agree with you, Rabbi Shmuel, to tell you that it's not an aveira, but the second time that the Torah repeated v'kinoi, that's to tell you that it's mandatory. Let's have a look in the pasuk to see where it's mentioned twice. So the pasuk says, "V'avar alav ruach kina, v'kinei es ishtoi." That's the first time. But v'hunitma. In this scenario, the woman was guilty. Or maybe a different scenario. Avar alav ruach kina, v'kinei es ishtoi, v'hiloinitma. It's also relevant in the case where she did not do the aveir. So Zok the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva says, since it repeats the kinei es ishtoi a second time in the pasuk, from there we know that it's mandatory. What about Rabbi Shmuel? Rabbi Shmuel says the fact that the Torah repeats the kinei es ishtoi, you can't bring a raya from it because it has to illustrate the scenario of nitba and the scenario of loy nitba. So therefore, once the Torah is talking about a different scenario, which it had to discuss, it's not shver that the Torah repeats all the details again. That's the norm. You shouldn't read into that. You can't bring a raya that there's an extra v'kinei. Dr. Gemara, Rabbi Shmuel, Adi the boy lemichtav hinitma v'hiloinitma. Since the pasuk had to illustrate both scenarios, you can't ask why the Torah repeated the kinei, because in each scenario the Torah is going to give us the full information. And this is not a new thing. This is the chiddush of the Rabbi Shmuel. The Tana of the Rabbi Shmuel. The Tana of the Rabbi Shmuel. Called parsha shenemer v'nishnis. Whenever a parsha is stated and repeated, loy nishnis ela b'shvil dovish nishchadish. It's possible that the Torah will write over a whole parsha for one little detail that the Torah wants to be mechadish. And therefore, don't read into it, don't bring a raya in there. The ironic thing about this part of Rabbi Shmuel is he's talking about the Torah repeating something. The Gemara is going to repeat this Tana of Rabbi Shmuel 3 times tonight. Zok the Gemara, lo yitama. Now let's analyze the second machlokes, whether a kohen hedjed is mechuyev to be metama himself to deal with his sister if she's nifteres. Rishus, it's just permission. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva Amar Chayva. Rabbi Akiva said, no, it's mandatory. My time with Rabbi Shmuel. So tomorrow, I did the chsev emar lakayana b'nei Aaron. V'yamar ta'aleim l'nefesh lo yitama ba'amov. Since there was a blanket iser on the kohen to become tamei, we need the Torah to carve out the exceptions. It's stricha l'michtav lo yitama, so that we know that to his sister it could be matama. Rabbi Akiva says, no, I don't need lo yitama to tell me that he's allowed to be metama to his sister. I already know that from the other part of the pasuk. Michiim l'sheiroi, not it says kin l'sheiroi karav elov, and it says psula. So once again, lo yitama lomel. I disagree with you, Rabbi Shmuel, that lo yitama tells me that it's a rishus. I know it's a rishus because it already lists off this sister as someone who's an exception to the rule that prohibits a kohen to become tamei. The fact that it said lo yitama, it's extra, lo malila chayva. That teaches you that there's a mitzvah chiyuv for a kohen to be metama for a sister. Rabbi Shmuel, according to Rabbi Shmuel, lo yitama seems to be extra. So it is, but we needed to teach us another limud, that lo mitama bein mitama levareh. Rachman letzlon, if someone loses an arm, a limb, that's aver min achai, and that's tamei tumas meis. Although a kohen can be metama for a sister, if she dies, if one of her limbs are severed, he's not allowed to become tamei by coming into contact with one of those limbs. And that's what the lo mitama is told. So, for Gemara, if you need lo yitama to tell you that a person may not be metama, a kohen may not be metama to the limbs of a sister, so once again, where does Rabbi Akiva have an extra lo yitama to teach us that there's a chiyuv for a kohen to be metama for a sister? And now we'll turn on to Amud Beis and we'll get the answer to that question. Zok to Gemara, Rabbi Akiva. Zok Rabbi Akiva, we still have an extra word here because lichta v'chaman Allah. He could have said v'lachoyse b'sula hakaroy ve'elav la to her, and we would know it means that she has rishus to be metama. V'lishtoik, the pasuk could have stopped there. Yitma lomel. Why did it say yitama? That one last word is extra. Shemami no, that the Torah is telling us that it's not only optional, but it's mandatory for a kohen to be metama for a sister. Rabbi Shmuel, according to Rabbi Shmuel, yitama is extra. Dr. Gemara, we're going to go back to our default answer. Because of a law, because of Nami Yitma. Once the pasuk has to say law, it will say Yitma as well. Like the Tanya of Rabbi Shmuel, the Tanya of Rabbi Shmuel, Kol Parsha Shenemar V'Nishnis, V'Nishnis Ela B'Shvil Dovish and Shchadish Ba. It had to say law, so Yitma comes along for the ride, and you can't be medayik anything extra from the Yitma. So now we've explained the two machlokes. The machlokes by Sotah, if kina is mandatory, and the machlokes by a sister, if it's mandatory for a kohen to be metama to a sister. Now we're going to look at the halacha of lo olam b'hem ta'avodu, the chiyuv to not free an eved. Now it's interesting to note, my daughter had a baby in Toronto. Why? Because she wanted to come home to have her baby. Let's not forget about child tax benefit and the OIB, but we'll put that aside. She wants to come home to her mother to have the baby. What does that mean? That means her husband is not from here, which means where is the baby ultimately going to grow up and live? Not here, because the husband will go to the wife's place to have the baby, but the baby's not going to live there. On the flip side, if you have a son who lives in Toronto, he might end up going to New York or to Baltimore or to wherever his wife was raised to have the baby. But then the baby is going to live in Toronto because the baby is going to live where the family settles, where the husband comes from. So that becomes very apparent here as well. So let's look at this. It's you're allowed to keep an eved. Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Akiva. So the question is, my time at Rabbi Shmuel, why in the world do I need a pasuk to tell me that I'm allowed to keep an eved? Why would I not be allowed to keep an eved? Zok Gemara, I'll tell you why not. Because not all avodim are you allowed to keep. There's the 7 amamim, Nani, Chiti, Amori, Prizi, Chibi, Yehusi, and Girgashi. Those 7 amamim, we're mandated to wipe out, to kill. You cannot have avodim from those nationalities. So Itzrich. Therefore, I need Itzrich Navi Lemichtav Loyal Bab Tavoidu to tell you that in certain scenarios, you'd be allowed to even maintain an eved that is the progeny of the Knainim, of the 7 Amamim. Lemishri echad mikola umais. What if you have an Indian, Pakistani, who came and he was Bala Knainis. He came and he married a Knainis, and they have a child. So this child, its mother is from one of the 7 Amamin, but his father is just a regular guy. How do you know that Eved does not have to be killed? That you're allowed to keep. How do you know you could buy that Eved? That's what I learned from La'olam Bahem Tavodu. That if the mother is a Knani, but the father is not, such an Eved is mutter to keep, and you don't have to destroy them. The Tanya we learned, Minayin la'echad mina umayis, shabal ha'knainis, v'hoiled mimena ben. If a male from a different nation married a knainis and gave birth to a son, how do you know sha'atar shoy l'knoisay be'eved? How do you know that you're allowed to buy that eved and you don't have to destroy that nation? But loimer the gam ibnei hatoishavim hagor mimachem mehem tiknu. Even people who are living here, living amongst the 7 Amamin, from those people you could buy an eved. But that means the father was not a knani. Yachol af knani shabal achas mikol umois. You might think that if the father was a knani, but the mother was not, that is also the type of eved that it's mutter to buy. And this goes back to what I said before. Who is it mutter for you to keep as an eved? A child that was born in the land of the Knainim, because that means the father was not from there. Only from those children who are born, because the mother who was a Knaini wanted to come back to have the baby over here. But really the father is not a Knaini. That an eved you're allowed to buy. But not from people who end up settling in the Eretz Shiva Amen. Because that means that likely the father was the Knaini. And if the father was the Knaini, the child the Knaini, and rather than buying them as avodim, you'd have to kill them. Rebbe Kiva, how does Rebbe Kiva know that it's mutter to have an eved whose mother is a Knaini? He knows it from Mehem Tiknu Nafka. It says in the pasuk, "V'gam ibnei Teshavim Mehem Tiknu." You're allowed to buy avodim from them. So I already know it's rishutz. So La'olam Behem Tavodu is once again redundant. Lama li l'chayva. Rabbi Shmuel says the reason why I need La'olam Behem Tavodu to tell you Behem v'loy b'achech. You're allowed to hire a slave that's a Knaini, but you're not allowed to use a Jew as a slave. And Rashi says you're not allowed to do avoidus eved. You're not allowed to do the type of work that you do with an eved with a fellow Jew. That's what Shmuel learns out of Bahem. Dafka with them, with the goyim, v'loy b'achechem. How would Rabbi Kiva know that? Rabbi Kiva b'achechem, he knows that Miseifer de Kronafka, it's a before it's a pasuk. It says Uva'achechem b'nei Yisrael ish ba'achiv lo'isir de boy b'farach. Rabbi Shmuel, why do I need Bahem if I have Ba'achechem? So he goes back to that same svara. I did Ksivu Ba'achechem, Ksiv Nami Bahem, the Tanya de Rabbi Shmuel, the Tanya de Rabbi Shmuel, Kol Parsha Shenemer V'nishnis, any parsha that's repeated, it's possible that it's only because of one detail the Torah repeats the whole parsha. Like Nishnis Ela B'Shvil Dover Shenishchadish Ba. Period. So I just want to talk a little bit about the avodah of an eved, which could be called avoidus perach. The Torah says one is not allowed to do avoidus perach with a yid. What is avoidus perach? So I want to share with you a very interesting thought that my son-in-law told me today. In our Seder, we have many things that are symbols of avdus, and we have many things that are symbols of cheres. The interesting one is matzah, because matzah is both a symbol of avdus, it's lechem, but it's also a symbol of cheres. We eat it by seva. So what is pshat in this matzah? Is it avdus or is it cheres? So my son-in-law told me a beautiful thought. And that is, in order for us to have achieved Pharis and become Abdei Hashem, we needed to draw some of what we learned from our actual Avdos in Mitzrayim. So it's the matzah that has in it the Avdos that's valuable for us to internalize, which is what allowed us to accept the Avdos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and become free people. And I'm going to give you two specific examples. They built Pisam and Ramses. Pisam and Ramses were cities that could never, ever have been built because their foundations, there was no proper bedrock or even good soil. It was impossible for a building to survive. Yet they were forced, the Eden, to build knowing that it's never going to survive. Imagine how demoralizing that is when you're forced to build the building and you know you'll never have that satisfaction that that building will ever survive. That was an important lesson Klal Yisrael needed to have. Why? Because it says in Chazal, Lo yalacha hamalacha ligmar. You don't have to finish every project, but the iyata ben chayin libachim. You have to do what you have to do, even though you don't see that your efforts will come to fruition. You don't see how they'll come to fruition. You still have to put in your ishtadlus. That's a very big commitment. How could we be on that level? We were on that level because the Mitzrayim primed us to be on that level. The Mitzrayim primed us by making us do these types of things, and this opened our eyes up that this is something that's palpable. Another thing that we got from the Mitzrayim, we know the Mitzrayim would make the men do the job of the woman, and the woman do the job of the man. That's very unnatural. It's asking us to go against our natural tendencies. Well, we know Yidden are Rachmanim, but from time to time they have to kill a Molech. They have to be very violent and brutal. How do we have those things in? How do we have that in us? We have it in us because we were trained by the Mitzrayim to do things sometimes that are against their nature. So I saw a whole shtickle that goes through many different aspects of the Shibud of Mitzrayim and shows how those attributes that we picked up there actually were necessary for us to become the B'nai Chayron by being Avodim of Hashem. And that's symbolized in the Matzah, which takes some of that Avdus and makes it into the Chayr. The next Gemara is very much from a male perspective. The Omer Abchista, Zenusa Bevesa, if there's nus in the household, Kikari L'Shimshima, it's like worms in sesame seeds. It's going to eat it up and destroy it. The Omer Abchista, Tukva Bevesa, if there's anger in the house, once again, Kikari L'Shimshima. Zok the Gemara, Idi v'idi be'itza. This is if the wife is into snus, or if the wife loses her temper, that destroys the household. If a husband loses his temper and is always angry, or he is doing mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim that are not condoned, that will not destroy the household. So that's, I don't know exactly how that works, but Rashi tells us very, very specifically and practically why when a woman engages in these things, it will destroy a household. Why? Because it directly destroys the house. She's not going to do her household work. She's not watching her house to take care of it. And she'll give away her husband's things to her lovers. And that will literally directly destroy the household. There's a story with a man who came home from work and he opened the door to his house and the house looked like it was hit by a tornado. There's dirty clothing on the floor, sticky, it smells. Kitchen has dirt all over the walls. There's dirty dishes everywhere. And his wife is sitting and relaxing on the couch. And he looks at her funny, like, what in heaven's name is going on over here? And she says, my dear husband, you know how every day you come home from work and you ask me, what did I do today? Well, today I didn't do it. So that's what it means. If a woman's neglecting the house, it falls apart. There's a Avram Malach, he's a Baal Musar, but he's a very funny guy. So someone sent me a little video clip of him, and he says, why is it that women get so frustrated at their husbands when they're slaving, taking care of the house, preparing for Pesach. We're just chilling out. Because you have to understand, where is the man's place of work? Out of the office. So when he comes home, his home isn't perceived by him as a place of work. His home is perceived by him as a place to relax. But a woman, her house is her factory. That's where she makes everything happen. So imagine you're working in your office hard, and one of your employees walks in and lounges on the floor and smokes a cigarette and starts reading a magazine. Don't get out of here. What are you doing? We're at a work day. How dare you mess up a work day? You lazy good for nothing. So that's exactly how our wives perceive us. We're walking into their office and we're relaxing when they're in the middle of hard work. I always tell people that it's so difficult for me, the stress of Erev Pesach, because relaxing on the couch isn't so comfortable anymore while I see my wife working so hard. That's how hard the men have it before Pesach. Of course, everybody knows the story where a husband saw his wife working so hard. He said, my dear wife, what can I do to help? Did you want to help me? Go to shul and learn. Just get out of my hair. Right? So he goes to shul, and he comes back after 3 hours. And his wife says, what are you doing back here? He says, there's a limit to how much I can help you. The very first wide line. Before Klal Yisrael, the Tchait, and Rashi tells us in every house there was a Shrosh Shechina. It says in the pasuk, Ki Hashem Elokecha mishalech b'kerev machanecha. Hashem is mamish going inside your machane. We all know, how do you get the Shekhinah to come inside your machane? Very simple. Don't chase it out. By default, it will come. But Kivin Shechatu, once Klal Yisrael did Averis, Nistalka Shechina mehem. That caused that the Shekhinah should leave. Kenemar v'layira b'cha ervas tovar, and then Rachman Litzlan v'shav me'acharech. Amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan. Kol ha'oitza mitzvah achas ba'olam hazeh. If someone does one mitzvah in olam hazeh, mikadmosoi v'ilachas lefanav l'olam haba. It goes in front of him like a trumpet. The mitzvah introduces him and makes a big tumult. Machlat. The tzaddik who did this mitzvah is coming. Your mitzvahs will go in front of you. On the other side, it wraps itself around him. And it comes to him l'yom adin. Their ways will wrap around them. Yalu b'toyu will go up with them into the toyu, the emptiness v'yavedu, and destroy them. So there's a famous story that probably isn't true, but it's a good story, so it doesn't have to be true. Where Rabbi Gifter Tatzal, and I can't believe this happened to a Gifter, but he's the one who I heard the story about, was by a very, very wealthy man to raise money for the Telzi Yeshiva. And the wealthy man wrote him out a check for $18. And Rabbi Gifter was disappointed. So he tells the Yid, Achvilach tarzelen amais. Amol gewin Yid, nicht as a ehrliche, nicht as a greite Tzadik, nicht as a Talmud Chochem, nicht kein Lerner, Ebscher hat Averis Eich getan, und es ist gekommen, die Zeit für sein Petire. Und kommt der Reif in Wesen Shalmailo, und sie fängt an kommen, Geließe, schreckendike, pachendike, gewarte Malochen, for jeder Avera, was hat getan, like we learned in the Gemara, they come after you, the Averas. Und sie sind reingekommen in die Wesen Shalmailo, noch Avera, das getan, jens getan, bis hat sich aufgebaut, ein Heif von Averas, und schreckendike, pachendike, schlechte, schwarze Malochen, ein Heif as wie Mount Everest. The Zednet is good. It didn't look good for him in this entire. And suddenly springt rein a große, heilige, reine, weiße, scheinende Kamalach und sagt, fahr weg alle Avedes. Der Yid hat mit sich Fusateire. Like it says, Mikad Motzei Vailachat Lefonov. Der Yid hat einmal gegeben $18 to the Telzi Yeshiva. Mit dem darf man euch smacken alle Avedes. And the category said, what are you talking about? Look at these Averis. Okay, it's a mitzvah, but it's not going to neutralize this huge fight of the bears. And they're fighting back and forth. And the Ben Shemata doesn't know what to do. They need an arbitrator. So they call the Rebbeinu for themselves. How do we deal with the situation? The Rebbeinu says, let's look at this ration. First of all, we need to know how much Sotah Torah you can acquire for $18. The Tel Yeshiva. Who would be able to answer that question? The Rosh Yeshiva. The Rebbeinu calls me up and says, Reb Gifter, Vivil Teira, Vivil Sotah Teira can the caveman in the Tel Yeshiva with $18. Aber gesagt, das ist eine moderne Frage. Man hat mir keinmal nicht gefragt, als habe ich eine Frage, was darf man wissen? So der Rebbeinu hat maßgebend, was er tut sagt. Habe ich gesagt, der Rebbeinu should give him back his $18 and let him go straight to hell. So I don't believe that story really happened, but it's a good story. Talk to Helig Gemara Vayta. Rabbi Lothar Omer, Kishura Baika Keller. The Avera sticks to him like a dog. Can't shake it off. Shenemar v'loshama eleho. Yosef was rejecting and repelling Eshes Potiphar. Lishkav etla, to lie near her. Liyosima, to be with her. And we dash from Lishkav etla b'aylam hazeh. Liyosima l'aylam haba. He knew that if he would succumb to her now, he would be stuck with her in aylam haba. And not awesome. Really, we should be able to make a kal v'chomer that not one aid should be able to be believed to say she was nitmas, but you should need two aid. Because up until now, we said everybody agrees that if only one aid comes along and says that she was nitmas, they're believed. But really, we should make a kal v'chomer to tell us that you need two aidim. The edus that said she was nistar, that doesn't make her also permanently. What does the Edom who say she was nistar do? They make her go through the Sotah process. So if she comes out clean, she will no longer be usher to her husband. So it's not such a grave consequence, yet you still need two Edom to trigger that process. Nevertheless, Edom is kayemis b'pachas mishnayim. So Edus achrayna, the Edus of Tumah, which condemns her forever, that'll make her be permanently also to her husband. That should require a lot more strength. Surely you should need two aid. How could you say you only need one aid? Because it's a xeris akos. Talmud Leimer v'aid ein ba, like we learned earlier in the Masechta, specifically on Daf Beis, the aid ein ba, and we learned aid means two aidim. There's no two aidim, but there's one aid that says she's tamei, she's believed. Even one aid is believed that she was nitted. So for the Gemara, not that you know for sure that for Eidei Tumah, one aid is enough. So let's use Eidei Tumah as the source, and let's bring a raya to Eidei Stira that one aid should be enough. The Kal V'chomer ladies are Rishayna, Me'ata. Uma Eidei Sa'achrayna, Shesh Reis Yisr Olam, Madach Eidei Tumah, Miskayem Espeid Echod, one aid is enough. Eidus are Rishayna, She'ena Yisra Yisrael. The Eidus Rishayna of Stira, that doesn't create a permanent Isser. Eino Din, Chet the Sky Beid Echod, surely an Eid Echod should be enough. So tomorrow we have a pasuk for Eidei Stira that you need to aid him. Talmud Loimar, Ki Matzah Ba'ervas Dov. In the pasuk of Gershon, it talks about one of the reasons why a husband would want to divorce his wife is he found in her an Ervas Dover. So use the word Dover. And by the parish of Din and Mamonis, the Torah teaches us, Al Pishnei Edim, or Al Pishloish Edim Yokum Dov. So we have Xeris Shabbat from the word Dover to the word Dover. Ma Dover ha'amar la'alon Al Pishnayim Edim, Afkan Al Pishnayim. We have a Xeris Akosov that the default amount of Edis that are required for any Dover Shebe'erva are two Edim. And therefore, don't make a Kal V'chomer from Eidei Tumah that Eidei Stira could be believed with one aid, because you have the overarching principle that by Devarim Shebe'erva, Dover, you need two aid. Right to Gemara, do I need this external Gzer Shava, Dover, to teach me that by Eidei Stira I need two aidim? Minei in the pasuk of Sotah, it's clear that you need two aidim for the stira. And how is that? Zogt Gemara, Hai mechimotza ba'erves davar davar nafka. Are you telling me the source of the fact that you need two edim for the stira is from a gzeir shava? No, minehu be'i the pasuk. Mi ba nafka. It says ve'ed ein ba. And the echad is good for a ba, for edi tuma. But for other things, like edi stira, one aid would not be believed. So you have a pasuk minehu be'i in Sotah telling us that you need two edim for edi stira. Ba v'loy bekinui, ba v'loy bestira, like we learned earlier today. Ba is telling you that this special halacha that one aid is believed is exclusively by edi tuma. It doesn't apply to kinui, and it doesn't apply to stira. Zok Gemara, you're right. The makar of two edim required for edi stira is mineu bei from ba. So now we have a limud of davar that teaches you that ein davar shebe'erva pachas mishnayim. What do I need it for? I know everything I need to know by Sotah. Dr. Gemara, v'toma ba'alma b'li kinui b'loy kinu u'b'loy stira d'loy mehemen edechad minoah. What if there was no kinu, there's no stira? Two edim or one aid comes along to Bezdin and says they saw this Eisha Shish Mizana. How do you know that one aid's not believed? How do you know that you need two edim to come to Bezdin about a regular woman with a good reputation and say edus that she was Mizana? That you know from the Gzeir Shava. Never can't kimatza ba Everest Dovar by Gershon. Whenever la alon by Mominis. Al pishnei edim al pishloish edim yakum davar. Ma davar ha'amr la alon is edim shnayim. Just like for dinim momnitz, you need to have two edim. Afkan edim shnayim. Beautiful. Zok to Gemara, we've been using the term edus rishayna, referring to edus stira, and edus achrayna, referring to edus tuma. Here the Gemara speaks it out to Ferish. Tanu Rabbanan, Ezai hu edus rishayna, zu edus stira, edus achrayna, zu edus tuma. And we'll stop here, and we'll, Be'ez Hashem, continue tomorrow at 7 o'clock or at 9. Shkoyach, everybody. Have a good tavach, a wonderful week. We should have a week of great achvacha, great bracha coming into the Yom Tov Pesach.
Yosy, I would like you to take back in the name of Rav Gifter the story.
Okay.
It's too hard.
It's not possible that Rabbi Gifter said that.
It's not possible.
I agree with that. I don't know why I heard it in Rabbi Gifter's name. I don't know why I'm giving him the blame for it. There's no way Rabbi Gifter could have said that.
No, I don't think he ever said that.
I agree. 100%. I agree. But still a good story.
Bothering me the whole time since you said it.
I'm sorry. You should have cut me off right away. I apologize.